Hello, and welcome to our latest Human Givens Ask the Expert podcast. This one's on why having postnatal depression doesn't mean you're a bad parent. Our expert today is Sara Shoesmith, who's recently qualified as a Human Givens practitioner. Now, Sara has had a lifelong interest in mental health, but she now has a very personal motivation to help others achieve emotional wellness and avoid mental illness. After the birth of her daughter, Sara suffered the terrifying experience of severe postnatal depression, which resulted in her being hospitalized. By seeking help with a Human Givens therapist, Sara started to receive the support and guidance she needed, and thankfully, she made a full recovery. As a result of this, as well as now being a qualified HG therapist, Sara spends her time actively promoting good emotional health through her Only Human website and Facebook page. And we're really very happy to have Sara here with us today. Hi, Sara, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you really well.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to join us as our expert today. And by the way, congratulations on qualifying as an HG practitioner.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Now, Sara, I know you wrote a wonderful piece in the Human Givens Journal for us 2 or 3 years ago, I think. But I just thought, before we go through the questions, perhaps would you mind telling us about your experience of postnatal depression?
Yeah, of course. I'll try and keep it as as short as I can. Otherwise, we'll be here all day.
Of course.
So it started almost 3 years ago to the day, actually. So tomorrow it will be 3 years since Aria was born, my daughter. So immediately after having her, I felt very, very odd, and I knew that something wasn't right. So I was, of course, exhausted as you are after having, going through the labour and having a baby. My hormones were all over the place, but it felt more than that. And I was already on my journey actually to become a Human Givens practitioner. So I was already quite aware of what was going on in my head. So I very quickly picked up on that, and it just happened really quickly. I became very, very anxious and felt sort of immediately detached from not just Aria, or as I called her, the baby, but from my own body. I felt detached from my own body and from reality as well. So to condense it really, within 3 days of having her, I went from being excited and prepared about the birth and obviously having a baby to completely numb, and then that kind of shifted to panic, and then to being suicidal very quickly. So I also had elements of psychosis or postpartum psychosis as well, which exaggerated the symptoms of postnatal depression really for me. So that was within 3 days, and then by day 5 I was in a secure women's psychiatric unit whilst Aria was at home with my partner and family.
Wow.
And
how frightening that must have been. Gosh.
Yeah, I've had to do a lot of writing about it to kind of, process it all really.
Yes.
And then after 10 days, we went into a specialist mother and baby unit, which is where we stayed for around 9 weeks. So many of the symptoms for me kind of fit into lots of other categories, because it wasn't just the postnatal depression. So I'll probably touch on that later on anyway in some of the questions.
Oh, super. Well, thank you. Gosh, that's such a story to go from, I know, having had 3 children myself, that wonderful almost euphoria of expecting your baby, to go to go to the depths that you've just described must have been absolutely terrifying.
It was, and I think probably very much so for those around me as well, because they obviously saw that happen very quickly.
Yes, of course, yes. Thank you so much for telling us that, Sara, that very personal story. I happened to mention this podcast to a friend this morning, and I hadn't known this about her at all, but she said that postnatal depression, well, as she described it, she said it took 3 years out of my life, and it cost me my marriage. But that just sort of puts it into perspective as well as your story certainly does.
Yeah, it's still very, there's not a lot known about it even now. So
Yes.
that's why it's great. It's great that you're doing this podcast about it as well.
Brilliant. Yes. Well, I'm delighted to be doing it. So on that note, let's get going through the questions.
Yeah.
The first one being, I suffer from mental health problems and I'm worried this will escalate after the birth of my child. Is there a connection there? I would put in there. What can I do to prepare for this, and can you prevent postnatal depression? So that's a very big question to start with.
Yeah, I think, well, to break it down, I don't think we can ever 100% prevent postnatal depression, unfortunately, but we can definitely reduce our risk of developing it. So I don't want anyone to think that just because they've had mental health problems before, then that means they're definitely going to get it, because that's not the case. A lot of the time, it's the opposite, actually, and it's quite often people who've had no history of mental illness at all suddenly develop it after having a child, which is what happened with me.
Yeah, so I suppose they're just not prepared. They have no notion that something like that's
That's
going to
it,
happen.
yeah. So I think there is, it obviously carries some risk if you've had mental health problems before, but that also means that you will already have more support in place. So if you've been kind of through the system, so to speak, you would already have referrals there ready to be made to see the right people if you've had a previous condition. And also, I would just encourage people in terms of preparing, just to talk, whether it's to your partner or your family, a GP, ask to be referred, because you've got the right to do that. And a lot of people don't know that they have the right to be referred to a specialist midwife if they want to. So somebody who specialises in maternal mental health, or a lot of areas now actually have got new perinatal teams being developed. So perinatal community teams, and what that means is there'll be specialist midwives or health visitors and all sorts of people you can go to see. So just just talk about it.
And is it something that is spoken about in antenatal classes and things? Does it?
I mean, I do ask a lot of people this question, because for me it wasn't even mentioned at all in my antenatal classes. So the only reason I knew about it is because my mother had suffered from it. So there's an argument with that, in terms of, did that increase my risk?
And has that been looked at all statistically, or?
I believe that if it's to do with psychosis, postpartum psychosis, that does carry a genetic risk, but the postnatal depression, there isn't enough evidence to suggest that there is a direct link. So it's something that I'm going to look into more, because I find it obviously very interesting, and I want to know whether my sister's going to be affected and whether my daughter will then be affected,
or at higher risk of being affected.
Yeah.
Yes. Sarah, can you just differentiate for us postpartum psychosis from postnatal depression?
Yeah, so the postnatal depression is generally more to do with the feelings of low mood, and kind of, it can often include intrusive thoughts, but it's mainly characterized by severe low mood, just like any other kind of depression. Whereas the postpartum psychosis is a psychotic episode, or a series of psychotic episodes, where you kind of lose touch with reality. So there's definitely lots of areas where they overlap, but does that kind of answer it?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So they're yes, as you say, they overlap, but they're quite distinct as well. Yes.
Yeah. So just to go back to that other question, sorry, because it was quite a broad question, and I want to make sure I answer all of it. So I think what's really important to try and do to prevent as much as possible, or to prepare, is to try and, I know that we can't control everything, but try and reduce the potential of stress during pregnancy. So that's things like, trying not to do too much. If you've got a stressful job, perhaps reducing hours and just kind of trying to reduce as much as possible any potential stressors. So moving house is a huge stressor, and I did that twice when I was pregnant.
Gosh. That is
That's
tempting,
okay.
isn't it? You're suddenly pregnant, you maybe want a bigger house, or you want to decorate, or there
Yeah,
is that absolute nesting instinct that makes you want to do crazy things like completely renovate a house. Yes.
yeah, definitely. And when I reflect on my pregnancy, there was definite things that were, mistakes. Well, I didn't know that at the time, but obviously hindsight is a great thing. And when you look back,
Yes.
you can see there are lots of things that I did that may have affected my mental health.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So moving on to question 2, what are the signs of postnatal depression? You've sort of covered that, but maybe we could
Mm,
uh, look at some signs there.
yeah, I mean, I've
And
got plenty.
what should you do? Yes, I'm sure you have. And what should you do if you suspect someone else, perhaps a friend,
Mm,
has postnatal depression?
okay. So yeah, severe low mood, any changes or sudden changes in personality. So if because quite often some people can get quite manic as well with it. So it's a bit more like bipolar in that respect. They can be very manic and seem to be doing everything and have lots of energy, but then get low mood with it as well. So a lot of these symptoms are similar to depression, things like appetite, loss of appetite or overeating, sleep problems. And one of the main ones for me was having no bond with the baby, or no desire to bond with the baby or look after the baby.
Yeah.
Withdrawing, not wanting to talk to anybody, I had a lot of avoidance behaviours as well. So I would be avoiding the things that I didn't want to do, which was predominantly anything to do with Aria. So I'd be finding other things to do instead of looking after her, things that weren't important at the time.
Yes.
So you kind of lose all sense of priority and don't look after yourself. Like I'd have to be told to get dressed and have a shower and clean my teeth, otherwise I wouldn't do it. Those kinds of things. And then there's obviously, I mean, the title of this podcast is great because there's an overwhelming belief that you are a bad mum, or that you don't deserve to be here, or that your child is better off without you, or would be better off without you.
Gosh, so and that just compounds the feeling of not wanting to bond, or is it not being able to bond, and not wanting to care for the child, I suppose, if you think you're bad and shouldn't be near the child.
Yeah, it's
That's a kind of
just,
double
it's a
whammy, isn't it?
self-sabotaging
Yes.
cycle. Yeah, and then,
Yeah.
and like you say, that just kind of contributes to the overwhelming kind of feeling of hopelessness. And a lot of what I had, and I'm not sure entirely whether this was part of the psychosis or not, but I had a lot of intrusive thoughts about harming Aria, more so than myself. I'd have these sudden intrusive thoughts, and quite often I'd write them down or I'd tell somebody because I knew that it needed to get out somehow.
Yes. So presumably with those, you probably felt you shouldn't be near the baby if you
Mm,
if you were
yeah,
having those
exactly.
uh, thoughts of harming. Yes. Gosh, how scary. Yeah.
Mm.
Um,
And because I knew that it wasn't in my character at all, and I'd wanted this child for so long. It was just,
so some part of your brain, so you must have felt you had a sort of split brain there. You had some part of your brain was saying, no, this
yeah,
isn't me. This I wanted this child. I love this child.
yeah. And I think that was what was I felt the most hopeless, to be in that place, because I had part of my rational brain, yet I couldn't control it.
Yeah.
I was aware of it, but I couldn't control it at that time.
Mm.
Mm.
And I'm guessing we should mention here that men as well as women can suffer from postnatal depression.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's more common. Um, well, it's more common than we think, but quite often it can happen as a result of the partner becoming ill. So sometimes that's how it kind of manifests, is that the partner will struggle with their partner being ill, and then therefore they develop that as well.
I see what you mean. So if the mum, in effect, that whoever's given birth to the baby has become ill,
Yes,
their
yeah.
partner, that can trigger depression in the partner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now I've just realised that I've only answered the first part of the question, so I'm going to go back to my
Okay,
notes here
please do.
and talk about what to do. So if you are the person who thinks you might have it, or it's somebody that you are close to, then the main thing I would stress is just don't delay in asking for help, because the sooner you get it, the sooner you can get better. So whether it's going to A&E, which is what we did because we didn't know what else to do, you could contact a crisis team, a perinatal community team, but just get support in whatever way you can, because like I say, that means that you can get a quicker recovery.
Yes.
Especially if you're in a crisis, then don't start, Googling what should I do about this and what should I do about that. Just pick up the phone to somebody and ask for help.
Yeah. Because having heard from your story how quickly it can escalate, then you really just need to get professional help as soon as possible.
Definitely. I mean, if it's a milder form of postnatal depression, there's loads of online resources that are really, really good, and sort of support forums, but that's more for maybe a bit further down the line, or if it's not quite as severe.
Yeah.
Mm.
Okay. Well, there's a question here that slightly takes us off the core of postnatal depression topic, but I'm going to keep these questions in order, otherwise I'll forget something.
Yeah.
So the next one is, how can we prepare for becoming a parent?
I think this is very relevant still.
Okay.
Because it's, that's one of the ways that you can reduce your chances of developing it if you are prepared. So
yeah.
Some of the things that I've written down are things like lowering expectations. I think that's key. Being realistic, because for some reason a lot of us have this very unrealistic or idealistic vision of what motherhood looks like, or what being a parent looks like. We compare ourselves to other people and think this is what it should be like, or I should be doing it like them.
Yes, so striving for perfection. Yeah.
Absolutely. That was so harmful for me, and so that's one of the things that I'm really passionate about when I talk to other people, is to just, it's not difficult to lower your expectations and be realistic, but if people talked more about, the bad stuff as well as the good stuff that comes with it, then you would automatically be a bit more prepared, because you'd have that more realistic vision of it. So I think particularly if you have had any problems before, like we mentioned, if you've had any past mental health issues, or anyone in your family has, then it's important to disclose that as early on as you can in pregnancy or becoming pregnant, so that you could potentially have that support put in place. Keep yourself physically and mentally active. So don't just stop doing everything because the baby's on the way. I think that's really important. And just don't put pressure on yourself to know everything or be able to do everything, because it's, we don't learn everything from other people. We don't learn everything in antenatal classes. It's a journey that takes quite a long time, and everyone's journey is so different. So you can never be prepared for what's going to happen, because every child is different too.
Yes, so even with subsequent children, you don't necessarily know everything.
And I think something we as a couple, me and my partner, didn't consider is how it would change our relationship. Because regardless of whether you become ill or not, your relationship with your partner will change when you become a parent. And that's something that needs to be considered. And I was naive to that. I didn't think about, actually that would affect our needs. It would affect our needs differently, and not being able to have that quality time together and all these kind of things.
And that's another thing that really ought to be in antenatal classes.
Yeah.
Yeah, yes. And which actually puts us on to this next question. How can I make sure everyone's needs are being met? Baby, mum, dad, siblings, whoever else is involved.
Yeah. Well, I think, if I'm being honest, I think the mum still has to be the priority, or the new mum, should I say, because if she's not okay, then she can't look after the newborn properly, and it will kind of have a ripple effect on everyone else. But it's really important for everyone to be aware of each other's needs. You know, maybe it's something to be discussed before the baby comes along, to just, if there is a child that's old enough to understand, then to teach them about needs, and kind of, you know, prepare them about what it might be like, and just to give each other privacy when it's needed, if possible. Allow, you know, if there is another sibling, then allow time to have one-to-one with that child, so they don't get too jealous of the new baby. And if you've got grandparents to come and help, then take advantage of it, because then you and your partner might be able to have some time together. And just kind of be supportive and respectful of each other, because it's hard for everyone going through that transition. Not just, you know, it's really hard for everyone, and I think it's quite easy to forget that. I know I am focusing more on the mum being ill, but I appreciate that it is a transition for everyone. So if you don't have help as well, so if you don't have a partner, or you don't have parents that can help out, then ask for help in other ways, whether it's friends, or you can, you know, there are organisations you can go to where you can get extra help from health visitors or midwives and things like that.
Yes, I think that's it's so crucial, isn't it? Because there's a sort of pride in being able to do it all ourselves as mothers, I think, that
Yeah.
really is misplaced, because one of the needs, you know, amongst the needs of other people is their need to feel useful and helpful.
Yeah.
And it sure is going to help the
So
mum a lot as
important.
well. Yeah.
And I think, if, you know, especially if you're okay and your partner's okay, then your baby's going to be okay. So you've got to almost kind of reverse what we think we should be doing, which is looking after the baby first, but actually look after yourself first, and everyone else will be okay.
I like that. That's very well said. Yes. Yeah. Moving on to the next question, how long does postnatal depression last? Now, I'm guessing that's a piece of string sort of
Yeah,
response to
that's
that.
my answer is, how long is a piece of string?
Yes.
But it depends on many factors. So things like how severe the depression is, how what type of postnatal depression it is, whether you've got psychosis as well, or and other things. And also it depends on how soon you get help, because if you like I did get help very quickly at the beginning, that shortened my recovery time.
Yeah.
Whereas if you don't get the treatment early enough, it can take a lot longer. But it also depends on what kind of treatment you have, because there's lots of different options out there. But I've put here that I wouldn't like to say exactly how long, because if there's anyone listening to this right now who's in that place, and I said it takes a year to get better, that could be very harmful for them. So
yes, and in fact for them it could be a lot less than that.
exactly.
So
Yeah, and
yes,
it just depends
you
on
don't
the
want to set that
individual.
as an expectation. Yeah.
Yeah, the circumstances and lots of different factors. But mine, for instance, was, I would say, about 18 months before I felt completely okay. So the recovery started at about 12 months, but that was a very severe case with psychosis as well. But I know people who've recovered in 6 months or even less than that, depending on what support they've had.
Moving on to the next question, can you get postnatal depression more than once?
Unfortunately, yes, you can. It's not like a virus that we can become immune to, but there is there's an argument that if you've had it before, you're more likely to get it again. And then if you have it twice, you're more likely to get it a third time, and so on. So I know somebody who's had it 3 times.
So even with the awareness and the making plans and everything, it can still kick in.
It can, but then there's the other side to that argument, which is that if you've had it once, like you say, you're kind of empowered with the knowledge of what could happen. You know what to expect because you've had a newborn baby before. It's not quite so scary. And then you would definitely have support in place if you've had it before.
Yes.
So there is one argument that says, yes, you're more likely to get it again, but then also you've got more support. So even if you did get it again, it probably wouldn't be as bad because of that. Yeah.
And what should you do? And obviously this happened to you, Sarah. What should you do if you feel detached from your baby?
It's a really difficult one, this. But I think just to remember that, if you can be slightly rational, just remember that you are not a bad person, and this isn't you. It's the postnatal depression or the illness rather than you. It's not you, your kind of character. So I beat myself up about this a lot because I thought, well, this is me, and I'm obviously, there's something wrong with me if this is how I think. But just go easy on yourself and remember that it's not permanent as well. This is a temporary thing, and you're just in that moment, you're emotionally hijacked. Yes. So just take baby steps every day, and literally really small tasks until you feel more comfortable and grow in confidence. So if you've got that detachment with your baby, then you're going to want to naturally avoid doing anything to do with the baby. So I started by just, changing the odd nappy, or more than I felt comfortable with, if that makes sense. And then I would just gradually increase my contact with her as my confidence increased. And again, just asking for help, because there's specialized support out there for bonding issues with your child, if that's what you're suffering from.
Right.
And so what somebody said to me, which is interesting because I was adamant at the time that this wouldn't work for me, but she said, fake it till you make it. And I thought, okay, well, what's that all about?
Yes.
But she was referring to making eye contact with Aria, which I avoided completely, and smiling at her. She talked about the fact that Aria needed that from me, but obviously I didn't want to give that, so I had to force myself to do it. And I hated it, but the more I did it, the easier it became.
Interesting. Yes, because fake it till you make it is true of many walks of life, and when one's feeling depressed and things. So interesting that works in bonding with your child as well. Yes, because of course they're looking for eye contact and smiles, aren't they? So
and it was actually after that things started to shift, because I realized I got more from her when I did that.
So she was reciprocating, and you were gaining from that. That's beautiful, isn't it? Yes. Yeah. Now, Sarah, here's an interesting one. Can you have postnatal depression when your child is grown up, or is it an instant disconnection after birth?
I think again, this one depends on really the type and the severity, but generally it develops within the first few weeks or the first 1 to 2 months. That's the kind of average, but it can be up to 12 months. So some people can be absolutely fine until their child's first birthday, and then all of a sudden it can arrive then, but it's generally not after that time.
Yeah, that must really catch people off guard if everything's gone fine for the first year and then this happens. That must be very difficult to deal with.
And I know that with postpartum psychosis it's different, because it's usually much quicker, so it's a matter of days or hours generally. I mean, it can be weeks, but it's usually a lot quicker.
Yeah.
And some people actually develop depression whilst they're pregnant. So that's something called antenatal depression, which they can get before the baby's born.
Gosh, I hadn't heard of that. Right. Yeah. Yes. Which presumably manifests in the usual ways that depression does. Yeah.
But then that can just get worse once the baby's born.
Right, especially if it hasn't been noticed or caught during pregnancy.
Absolutely.
Here's a question from a spouse. How should I approach my wife's postnatal depression, and what can I do to help?
I think the spouse has the most difficult job, if I'm honest. I mean, there is a lot that they can do, but just it is such a hard job being that person, because you have to be their hope, because they will have none. So you have to be their hope that they will get better. You have to keep believing that, and just remember that it is temporary. She will get better, or in this case, yes, she will get better. So offer to help if she wants it, but also don't offer too much. Like you mentioned before, it's really important that she doesn't feel useless or hopeless, like she can't do anything, because that's just going to increase her frustration.
Yes, so don't entirely take over.
Yeah, it's got to be a very fine balance of helping, but not too much. And I think, well, I know from my experience, what would really help is keeping on top of things like cleaning and laundry, so that she doesn't have to think about it.
Yes.
Cooking meals, or asking family to cook meals if you can't, and just allowing her, or offering her, the opportunity to rest when she needs it, to sleep or rest, because that's so important, and that's what every new mum lacks, is that rest. But
absolutely.
But be patient and listen to what she's saying she needs, rather than focusing on how she feels. Just try and pick out what she's actually saying that she needs from that, and that would be really, really useful, I think. But also just to remember to not, and I'm sure most spouses wouldn't do this, but to try not to be judgmental in terms of, try not to comment on any parenting and say, oh, I wouldn't have done it like that, or we should be doing it like this, because that's something that would really, really make her feel a lot worse.
Yes, so really you want positive, the wife in this case wants positive support, but not...
just kind of gentle reinforcement or encouragement, rather than any constructive criticism, which might mean well but be quite harmful.
Yeah. And is there professional help for the spouse or the family of someone who's got postnatal depression?
I think this might depend on where you are in the country, unfortunately. I don't know if it's everywhere. But for instance, near us, there's a charity. We live in the Midlands, and there's a charity where my partner was able to go and talk to a befriender, so a male befriender, where he had been through a similar situation. But I think widely there isn't that much support for the men, other than going to find a counsellor themselves, unfortunately.
Yes,
which we did do anyway together, and he had some separately as well. But one of the things I was going to mention actually is to keep, if you are the partner whose wife is suffering, to keep your own needs met as much as possible as well, or at least keep them in mind, so that you can stay strong for her.
Of course. Yep. That's the old have your own oxygen mask on first scenario, isn't it? Otherwise,
and it's funny, because I remember my partner doing this when I was in hospital at one point, and there was one day out of the 9 weeks that I was there when he didn't visit me. He went to play golf, and I was so angry and upset. But I know that he had to do it.
He had to, yes.
He had to do it for him. So as much as you might feel guilty about doing that, just go and do it, because you've got to be okay.
And this again is when the more people you have to help in your family or close-knit friends or whatever is the better, because if you're just relying on one person, they also can need to get their needs met. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Sarah, I think you said your daughter's 3 tomorrow, is that right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yes.
she is.
And so can you give us a catch up? What you said, really it took 18 months to feel recovered. How are you doing now, and how's your relationship with your daughter?
Yeah, I mean, I can't actually believe that we are where we are. If I think about where we were even 2 years ago, but especially 3 years ago, I didn't think that I was going to survive 2 weeks with her, and now now she'll be 3. So we're very close now, and
Oh, good.
it doesn't seem to have affected her, touch wood. She's a very happy and intelligent little girl. She's very sociable, and now I'm doing I'm trying to share my experience through my social media and through things like this. I do a lot of speaking events.
Yes.
And I just can't quite believe that I'm the same person, having gone through that and then finishing my qualification. Now I'm actually helping other people and then showing them how to get through it as well. So
that's
it's
fantastic,
amazing.
isn't it? Yes. Tell us a bit about how your Human Givens therapist helped you. Were there specific things that he or she, ways in which they helped?
I think the main thing, I know the main thing she did and was there for was to lower my emotional arousal. So I was so highly anxious about absolutely everything. So I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat, and I was just a mess, really. And so what she did is gradually lowered my emotional arousal. She taught me about mindfulness and meditation, and we did a rewind technique actually on the pretty much from the moment that Aria was born up to that present moment, which I can't remember how long that was, but it was probably a few months at that point. And then we also did some couples therapy together with her after I had some sessions on my own.
Oh, that's interesting.
Because we felt that it was really affecting our relationship. So we actually did some sessions together with her, which I found so beneficial. And then I think it was after that that my partner went on to have some on his own as well. So I had quite a few overall, and then had a bit of a gap, and then came back to it about a year later, just to kind of top up when I started feeling that it was getting a bit overwhelming again. And just the tools that obviously that we can teach in Human Givens are so practical, and that's what helped, because I just needed somebody to tell me what to do, really.
Yes.
That's what I felt. I just wanted somebody to say, okay, do this and do this, and that's going to help. And I remember us doing 7-11 breathing, all 3 of us together. So Aria was probably 2-3 months old, and I was holding her doing 7-11 breathing, which calmed her down as well and stopped her crying because I was calming down.
You were going through your Human Givens therapy training as well, so that just as you learned more about the Human Givens approach, that must have helped.
Yeah, it helped massively, because I was learning so much about the brain, and all the practical things I was learning within that training, I was able to apply myself, and it was a massive part of my recovery, because it gave me purpose again. I felt like, when you first become a mother, I certainly lost my identity. I didn't know who I was, but by doing that, I was starting to get a bit of that back again. So I was getting much more of my needs met through doing that training, and it was really important for me to do something that was outside of just being a mummy and looking after her.
And now, our penultimate question: what should and shouldn't you say to someone suffering from postnatal depression?
There's some definite things that I remember that I heard that were the wrong thing. for sure. So things like man up, get on with it, you're fine, stop being emotional or overreacting. So obviously these are the things that we should not be saying.
Yes.
Don't make assumptions, don't be patronizing, and don't comment on parenting skills ever. So those are my shouldn'ts.
Yeah.
And the should is, and I think I did mention this already actually, is what do you need right now, or what would help you feel better right now?
Yeah.
It might be a hug, you know, it might be so simple. This is temporary. I'm here for you if you need me, but if you don't, I'm still here. Take your time and do what you need to do to get better, and just use encouraging language and kind of congratulate the small things, but not in a patronizing way.
I can remember, I was very lucky to not suffer postnatal depression, but I can remember I did have a cesarean section, and I can remember people dropping in for cups of tea, and in my head, I was thinking, please, can you just wash the kitchen floor?
Yeah.
I haven't got the energy to put the kettle on. So,
Yeah.
so the things, very practical things sometimes can just
It could be
hugely helpful.
Like you say, it could be just go and, you know, can you just go and cook me dinner?
Yeah.
Or go and do one round of laundry.
Yes.
So easy.
Yeah. Now, Sarah, we've mentioned different types of postnatal depression, but we've mentioned postpartum psychosis. But I think there are probably other sub-definitions as well. And
yeah, and they kind of, I'm not sure entirely whether they would be classed as different types of postnatal depression, but they're all, you know, illnesses that can surround becoming a mother or the whole perinatal period. So perinatal actually means around, I think.
So it can be before and after, yes.
Yeah, so some of the terms have perinatal in them, some have postnatal, some have antenatal, but they're all around that time. So there's something called perinatal OCD, which generally is more to do with intrusive thoughts. So it can be, a lot of people have a sort of health anxiety around their child, so they're convinced that their child is going to die or that something's wrong with it. That can be part of perinatal OCD. And there's a lot of rituals that you can, or that can develop. So I certainly had that in terms of, I was obsessed with doing laundry rather than looking after Aria. So that was one of my rituals, is I had to just constantly be doing laundry.
Everything had to be
or
spotless.
Writing lists.
Yes.
I was always writing lists. Antenatal depression I touched on is what can develop during pregnancy. So that's something to be, you know, to look out for, because that can develop into postnatal depression. Perinatal anxiety is very similar to perinatal OCD, really. It's, you know, some people can just have that isolated on its own without any depression. They can just have the anxiety. And then obviously postpartum psychosis can be anything from, you know, having sort of delusions, hallucinations. You can be hearing things. So you can believe that somebody on the TV is talking to you. You can have spiritual beliefs, and all sorts of things can be part of that.
So all the same symptoms as psychosis in general has, in other words.
Yeah. And then obviously the danger is that that person is not safe either to themselves or to the baby, because generally when there are deaths or suicides around the postnatal period, it's to do with psychosis. So I mean, I don't really like labels. I don't really do them in general. No. But when I've looked into these different types, I would say I had elements of all of them. But I was diagnosed with postnatal depression. But I know for a fact that I had psychosis. I know that I had lots of the other things. But it's a perception. And I think one point that I really wanted to mention as well is that baby blues is not postnatal depression. There's some
Right.
people have a
Yes.
perception that baby blues is like a mild form of PND, but baby blues is the hormonal, shift that happens when you've had your baby, and it will never last longer than 2 weeks. Baby blues. If it's more than 2 weeks, then it's something else.
Yeah. So that's just the sort of spontaneously bursting into tears type of symptoms, and
Yeah.
yes, the
And
rapid
actually,
falls.
I almost forgot to mention that some people can have postnatal depression but appear absolutely fine. So they can be like functioning perfectly well,
Oh
but
gosh,
they could have a
yeah.
mild form of postnatal depression. And even some people with postpartum psychosis can appear fine because they're in a manic phase when they've got it all together and they're doing everything with the child, but they're just, on the inside, there's a lot going on.
Yeah. So that's the question about how do we know if a friend's perhaps depressed or psychotic. That's a very key point, isn't it? The symptoms might not be obvious, but if you know the person, you're probably going
Yeah,
to notice that something's a bit odd, even if
yeah,
it's just that they're
definitely.
manically doing everything.
And if they
Yeah.
are quite manic and sort of high functioning, then it's worth thinking about, are they getting any sleep? Because if they're not, then there's definitely something wrong.
Yes, so
And if
that's
they've
always
got the inability to sleep.
that's a very key question to ask, isn't it? How are you
Mm.
sleeping, to anybody? Yeah.
Yeah, and I know that what's happening now is that the government are trying to bring in a new check for new mums. So after we've had a baby, we have a 6-week checkup for us, which is kind of very basic, isn't it? It's just,
Yes.
have your stitches healed okay? Is the baby breastfeeding or bottle feeding? That's generally all that they will ask.
Yeah.
But what they're trying to bring in now, which I've been part of campaigning for, is that we'll have a separate check for mums where they will have 15 minutes with a doctor to talk about how they really are or how they're feeling. So
That's excellent.
it could be in
Yes.
that 15 minutes that something gets picked up and they get
Yeah.
referred to somebody, which would be amazing.
I think that's absolutely brilliant, because it's very easy to hide things, and if you're only having to ask questions about the baby and
Yeah, and
nobody
if
looks at you.
the
Yeah.
doctors aren't trained to ask those,
Yeah.
those
No.
questions, to say,
No.
actually, how are you, like you said, how are you sleeping? How
Yeah.
are you emotionally? If they ask those questions, then a lot of, there could be a very different outcome.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, brilliant. Well, Sarah, that's the end of our questions. But is there anything else you'd like to add that we haven't managed to cover?
I would love to mention a book that I'm going to be in, because it is very personal to this, this topic. And there's a book that I'm part of, which is going to be 12.
Excellent.
I think there's 12 of us all together, who have all written our own short stories about something that we've been through. So this is going to be in there, my story of postnatal depression. And it's coming out very soon, so it's halfway through being proofread at the moment, so it might be quite soon. And
Fantastic.
it's going to be called Courage, and it's about stories of darkness to light. So everyone's got a very different story, and all the proceeds of the book are going to go to the Samaritans charity as
Oh,
well.
that's
So it's
really lovely. Super. Well, perhaps once it is published, you could let us know and we could put it as a link with this
yeah, that would be
podcast.
great.
Actually, that would be useful.
And
Brilliant.
the other thing I wanted to just mention is I want to, and I want other people to just continue raising awareness about this subject. So the way that I'm doing it is through speaking at events and through doing workshops for mums. I'm hoping to put on a retreat for mums next year, which is my next goal. I think that would be
Lovely.
amazing, something that's
Yeah.
very needed.
Yes. Oh, how fantastic. Well,
Yeah.
given that it's not so many decades ago that women were really just locked up for the rest of their lives with postnatal depression and
Mm,
psychotic events,
yeah.
I think we have made great strides, but there's still a lot of work to be done, isn't there, in raising awareness?
Yeah, definitely.
I know certainly with my antenatal classes, nothing like this was mentioned at all. It was
No.
almost as if in the mentioning of it, you might, give someone the idea, which
Yeah.
is ridiculous, isn't it?
Yeah.
So
I
everything
mean,
was always
I'm
upbeat.
surprised even that my mum had, had good treatment when she had it 33 years ago.
Yeah.
It was very unheard of then, but she actually got some really good treatment then.
She was lucky. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
So,
thank you so much, Sarah,
no,
for
thank
talking
you.
about your experience. Thank you. It's been a really interesting conversation, and I'm sure people will be inspired by your story. Thank you for telling us such a personal story, and certainly inspired by the work you're doing now. It's called Only Human Therapy. Is that what you're calling it, Sarah?
It is, yes.
So
Most people find me on Facebook. My Facebook page is Only Human Therapy, and then I've got a group on Facebook as well, which is called Only Human.
lovely. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I'm so happy you found a human givens therapist yourself and
Me
they were able
too.
to help you.
Yeah.
So to anyone listening, that might be a useful route. Um, it's fantastic you're now a human givens therapist yourself. And again, we as a team are delighted to have you as part on our team. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
Now, to any listeners, if you would like to find your nearest human givens therapist, search for the Human Givens Institute Therapist Register. So that's on www.hgi.org.uk. That's the website, and then find the register within that. And within that, there's a good search engine. You can search to find your nearest HG therapist or to find therapists with different specialty areas. We do hope you've enjoyed this Ask the Expert podcast. And if you have, please do share it with anyone you think might find it helpful or useful. Thanks for listening. We hope you have a good day. Bye for now.